Why is it that you became interested in this topic in particular?
When we wrote the proposal to the National Institutes of Health, there were several scholars who were studying cyberbullying, but they were studying it usually at one time point. And there were questions that we had at the time that could only be answered with a longitudinal study. So, for example, it wasn't clear whether people were cyberbullied and then that caused their depression, or if people who were depressed were more susceptible, right, to cyberbullying. And so we set out to answer that question. Is mental health sort of an antecedent or consequence of these experiences?
Can you tell me what you pulled from and how you went about conducting the research?
Absolutely. So we were able to pull a large sample, total 1,028 students in 6th through 12th grade at year 1. And it was a school-based sample. And so we drew students from 12 schools for time 1, and we had a total of 3 time points. And so every fall we had 4 years of data collection. So in the fall, we would collect an online survey, and then in the spring, we'd follow up with interview data and just ask them about some of their responses on the online survey.
What was it that you asked them? What were you looking at?
We were concerned with bullying specifically. So, and we asked students if people had, engaged in repeated sort of harassment or bullying behaviors towards them. We asked them if they had said mean or rude things because of the way they look or act or dress, if they'd had these experiences because of something that happened at school, and just generally if they've been embarrassed or humiliated online. Then we also were interested in depressive symptoms and anxiety.
When you say depressive symptoms and anxiety, was there a certain level?
We used commonly used scales, so the Center for Epidemiologic Studies, their depression scale, a 12-item version, and then we also used the Profile of Mood States for Adolescents scale.
What kind of answers did you get? What did you find?
We found this reciprocal relationship where cyber victimization caused depression over time. So at time 1, if you experienced cyber victimization at time 1, it was related to depressive symptoms at time 3, right? So 2 years later, right? But also, if you had depressive symptoms at time 1, it was related to increased cyber victimization at time 2. Right, so the answer is it's both, right? So if you were depressed, it could lead to more cyber victimization, and also cyber victimization leads to depression. The same thing with anxiety.
You found this circle that people were getting into.
Definitely reciprocal in terms of, people's experiences. And so we couldn't say, well, it's not just that, being cyberbullied online, leads to these mental health problems. We have this, really interesting story of, this reciprocal relationship that's happening.
What are the implications when you have a finding like this?
So I think it's really important for educators and mental health professionals to be aware of the relationship that occurs, of this relationship. And then, so when we're having, sessions with students that we're counseling, we want to make sure that we're asking them about these experiences and helping them to develop strategies for coping and potentially avoiding, being cyberbullied if possible. And so That's one thing with the mental health professionals, and I think also educators should ask students about what's happening online, because as I mentioned, some of these experiences do begin in school settings. And so just helping students to process what might be happening to them in these online spaces.
For our parents who may be viewing, explain for them what you and your colleagues actually found in terms of cyberbullying. It's not just a one-way street.
It's that being cyberbullied at time 1 is related to increased depressive symptoms 2 years later. And if you're experiencing depressive symptoms at time 1, it's related to increased cyberbullying or cyberbullying victimization at time 2, right? So 1 year later, and then also we found that depressive symptoms at time 2 was related to increased cyber victimization experiences by time 3, also a year later.
What can parents do, first of all, to identify that this might be going on, and then second of all, to possibly intervene before it continues?
One thing I think is really important is for parents to have an open line of communication with their students. I never recommend, taking away their devices.
As a parent, you might actually want to just take that out of the equation. Why not take away the devices?
I would say not to take it away, because it's better to have them be able to manage the experience than to take away the device, because it's pretty common, right, that they have these experiences. And so taking away the device, especially if they've done nothing wrong, right, we don't think that would help as much. Also helping them to be really self-aware and to be aware of their strengths, their weaknesses, and to love themselves, right? So that they don't, and also see themselves as connected to other people. And so they can imagine what it would feel like to be cyberbullied, so they wouldn't engage in those behaviors, because they know this is what it would feel like for that person if I did this to them.
Can you give me an example of what you might say to a child to give them that empathy?
I think it's something that would develop sort of over time, right? But through conversation, you're talking about, first of all, what their strengths are, what you love about them, right? You are really good at, thinking about, how other people might feel. You have really good perspective taking skills. And that's what you need to be a good digital citizen, right? And so just when you see compassion in them, point it out so that they are able to engage in those behaviors more so.
But what percentage of those over 1,000 students did you find that there was cyber victimization?
For this study, so the larger sample we had 1,028, but for this specific study, we only used 559 of the sample.
Of those 559, do you remember what the percentages was?
There were 53% who said that they had at least one of these 6 experiences that we asked them about.
And the 6 experiences again?
Being bullied, cyberbullied specifically, and then we asked about harassment as well, which might have occurred at one time point, right? So people saying mean or rude things to you because of the way you look or act, mean or rude things because of something that happened in school, being embarrassed or humiliated. Just general sort of name calling, whether people posted something that was derogatory about you just in general.
We hear the term cyberbully a lot, and you use the word cyber victimization. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what the difference is?
There's cyberbullying perpetration, and then that's usually when people right, are sort of aggressive behaviors towards an individual using electronic means of communication. Then there's cyberbullying victimization, and that's what we typically think of when we say somebody's been cyberbullied, and it's just, they're on the receiving end or the target of the experience.
Why is this such an important topic right now?
It's important because it's growing, right, in terms of the frequency of people having these experiences, and also in the current climate where it seems to be more accepted to demean people because of who they are, because of their weight, because of the way they look, right, because of their race or ethnicity. And as it becomes more accepted, we see these experiences happening more frequently. And because they're related to, right, these mental health outcomes, suicide ideation, they're related to, as we mentioned, depressive symptoms, anxiety, and people have studied a host of other outcomes that we see, substance use, related to cyberbullying experiences, and it's above what they might experience as a result of traditional bullying, say in schools or in their communities.
With the groups that you studied, was there a difference in race, gender, socioeconomic status?
We didn't find any racial differences. We didn't actually test whether there were racial differences in this study, but we wanted to make sure that we had a sample where Latino and African Americans were overrepresented. And so we have equal percentages of African Americans and whites, somewhere around 32%, and then we have about 17 or so percent Latinos in this sample.
Why did you need to overrepresent?
We wanted to make sure that, so a lot of the studies that were out at the time that we submitted the proposal, they tended to have really small samples of African Americans and Latinos, and we wanted to make sure we had a range of backgrounds, SES backgrounds, right? People who live in sort of urban settings versus people who were in the suburbs, and so we could run subsequent analyses where we could sort of tease out some of those within group differences.
A bottom line for our parents, just from the findings of the study and the implications for this study.
Bottom line, parents need to have open communication with their children so that they feel comfortable enough to say, well, this is happening online. And at that point, you want to start strategizing with them about ways that they are able to cope. The worst thing is to have them have these experiences and to be silent about them.
Is there anything I didn't ask you, Brendesha, that you would want people to know?
A lot of my work has focused on the race-related experiences that students have, and I think it's important to understand those general types of experiences as well as those specific to a person's race or their gender.
Do you see a difference in race and gender in terms of one person being a cyber victim more often than another, one race, one gender, where it happens more frequently?
In terms of the race-related experiences, most of my work has just focused on African Americans and Latinos, and we find that African Americans tend to have more frequent experiences where they're demeaned because of their race than Latinos, but the difference isn't significant.
If you could tell me where you did your undergraduate studies, your master's, and then your doctorate?
I did my undergraduate degree in history at Columbia University, and then my master's in learning sciences from Northwestern, and then my PhD in human development and psychology at UCLA.